We were out to dinner one night, and I met Mom at a place called Hana Haru.
We met randomly at a sushi bar. Coincidentally, there was an empty seat at a far end of the bar that was next to Uncle Richie. At the other side of the bar, there was an empty seat next to Dad. So rather than sit next to my brother, who I see all the time, I decided to take the empty seat next to Dad.
And we had a great conversation for a couple of hours, and then we ran into each other a couple of times over the next few months, and eventually I got up the courage to ask her on a date.
And he called me a couple weeks later and asked me to go out to see a basketball game, and I said no. Well, he had a girlfriend at the time. Then my brother called me and yelled at me for turning him down to see a basketball game, and I said I'm not going to go to a basketball game with some guy who has a girlfriend. That breaks the girl code.
First time she said no. I would have too.
And then I ran into him a couple weeks later and found out he and his girlfriend had broken up. And then a few weeks after that, I think he finally got the courage to ask me out again. Yeah. That time I said yes. I grew up in a small town, a suburb of Los Angeles near the beach. My parents were divorced, and one parent lived on one side of town and the other parent lived on the other side of town. And both parents worked full time. I was forced to fend for myself. So I would come home from school and make my own snack and do my own homework and change my clothes and go to various sports. I had 3 brothers, so there were always people coming and going in my house. It was a very busy place. It took a lot of discipline and organizational skills I think I developed early on to be successful. That's probably why today I get very stressed out when the house is chaotic and out of order and nobody does what they're supposed to do.
We grew up in a very affluent area. We lived in one of the nicer streets, and we probably couldn't afford to live there. My father owned a Burger King business. My parents weren't really getting along most of my adolescent years.
I don't remember a lot. I don't know if that's from smoking too much pot for too many years, or if it's a sort of a subconscious blocking out of potentially highly traumatic experiences. But I don't have a great memory of the way things were in the household other than bad. My mom was very shut down, closed. She wasn't real nurturing. I love my mom, and she did the best that she could, but she was just in a lot of pain herself. So it wasn't easy for her to be nurturing. You have to go back the generations. And if you go back to my grandmother, Grandma Ellie, when Grandma Ellie was a baby, her mother had what we know now to be a very severe case of postpartum depression. And she tried to drown Grandma Ellie in a bathtub when she was a baby. Luckily, neighbors heard screaming and crying and carrying on and came and saved the baby, saved Grandma. Not long after that incident, Grandma Ellie's mother committed suicide. So Grandma Ellie grew up in a household with her grandparents. She had no mother. And her father was a bit of a philanderer, wasn't around a lot. So she grew up with her aunts and uncles and her grandparents. And that's who raised her. And if you asked her, she would tell you that she had a beautiful childhood growing up with them. However, the mother-child relationship is so primal and such an important bond that to have them commit suicide and just essentially abandon you is probably the biggest trauma any human can experience. Grandma Ellie struggled and didn't have that kind of nurturing because it wasn't there. So you can't give what you didn't get. And since she didn't get that nurturing, she really wasn't very good at nurturing her own children. So my mother didn't learn it, didn't know how. So when it came to her, she wasn't real nurturing with us. She and my father were supremely unhappy with each other. Mark and I think still are shocked that they ever ended up together to begin with. My father came from a not a wealthy background. Neither did my mother. My mother grew up above a candy store, but she grew up close enough to New York City to kind of see what it was like to be in that affluent echelon. That's where she wanted to be, and she was going to figure out a way to get there one way or another. My father was a promising young, brilliant young guy who was accepted to Yale University on a full scholarship. So he had what I think she thought at the time was a great deal of potential. He wanted to be a teacher. She wanted him to make a lot of money.
It wasn't a great household. They fought a lot. My sister and parents fought a lot, so I was sort of the quiet one who they called happy and obedient.
Mark didn't end up suffering the same kind of emotional scarring and trauma that I did. We're different. We kind of experienced the same environment differently. I was always at the landing on the foot of the stairs when they were in the midst of a huge fight, listening in, hoping that no one was going to get divorced. Whereas Mark would go in his bedroom and shut the door and just tune everybody out.
It was a nice place to grow up. It probably could have been a better environment in the house. My relationship with my mom was very good. She didn't have a great relationship with either my father or my sister, so I was probably the best relationship she had in the house.
My mother was very disappointed in me. She was never, it never seemed like she was proud of me.
We didn't spend a ton of time together, but it wasn't, the time we did spend together was good. We had a good relationship. We got along well. My dad was probably my best friend growing up. I spent more time with him than with anyone else. My sister I had a good relationship with. She was tough to deal with when she was in high school. She was going through a lot, so she wasn't really that pleasant to be around. She wasn't mean to me, but she was just angry at the world, so she wasn't easy to be around.
My relationship was with my mother. I would say my mother and I are polar opposites. Even though she was very loving, she probably did the best she could, being a working mother and a single parent half the time. She expected us kids to take care of her more than her take care of us. I think when I was a child it wasn't a big deal, but as I got older I realized maybe that wasn't the best situation. My dad and I are very well, he passed away. He was very close. But he was always the one that gave me a lot of advice. Like, he was full of wisdom and would, share tidbits about his childhood, and I know I've told you before, he always said, each generation gets a little bit better and more self-sufficient and better educated. And he grew up in the Great Depression, so he didn't grow up with a lot, and he felt like we were very fortunate, and he enjoyed seeing that even you guys have more than we had. But we were very close, but he was definitely instrumental in giving me advice about making decisions about jobs and making decisions about college. He was the one that really encouraged me to go to college and to study hard and to play sports and to stay out of trouble. My brothers and I played a lot of sports together. They used to pick on me quite a bit when I was little. They definitely also tried to parent me at times when I was a teenager. If I tried to show up at a party that I wasn't supposed to be at, they would tell me to leave. And I have a unique relationship with each brother, but I definitely felt like the odd man out most of my childhood, so they were probably why I got really involved in sports, to try and prove to them that, you know, I was smart and cool and knew what I was doing.
What do you or how do you think the environment that you were raised in affected the way me and the boys were raised? How do you think the environment that you were raised in affected the way my brothers and I were raised? How do you think the environment you were raised in affected the way my brothers and I were raised?
That's a good question. I don't know a lot about your mother's childhood. What I do know is that your mother has an incredibly inherent, God-given, natural, effortless ability to be a parent. And not everybody has that. We came from divorced, both of us came from divorced families and a unhealthy environment and a non-nurturing environment. So did my brother. My brother, interestingly, sought out and attracted someone into his life who was the complete opposite of his own mother. And so fortunately for you guys, you ended up with somebody who is the Meryl Streep of mothers.
I didn't really want to have kids as soon as we had kids. Dad really was eager to start a family and have kids, and somehow he talked me into it. I used to babysit a lot when I was little, and I was always really good with kids. Dad and I have a happy marriage, and it seemed like our house would be complete, you know, our lives would be complete with a family.
It led me to find a partner that I knew I was going to be very compatible with. Unfortunately, I'm not around as much. I got lucky because I found someone who picks up the slack and has done an amazing job with the three of you, and I sort of come in as the closer. You know, she's like the starting pitcher and I'm the reliever. Your life comes secondary to your children's. What you may want to do or what you may want out of life completely changes, and it goes to making sure that you provide a good environment and good moral compass and teach your children how to be productive members of society.
Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be.
No sleeping. Stop, dog, stop. The light is red.
Take my
Light is red. Go, dog.